The laughter was the worst part, Dot. It wasn't a loud, boisterous sound. It was worse. It was a quiet, silver tinkle of a laugh from my sister, Isabel, quickly stifled behind a perfectly manicured hand. It was a low, rumbling chuckle from my brother, Caleb, that he disguised as a cough. It was the ghost of a smirk on my father's lips as he stared at me down the impossibly long stretch of polished mahogany. They thought I didn't notice. But in that sterile, silent boardroom, the sound echoed like a gunshot. The official word was redundancy. My father, Richard Davenport, leaned forward, the picture of reluctant, patriarchal duty. His silver hair was perfect. His bespoke suit, a product of our own company's tailoring division, was perfect. His expression of feigned regret was nearly perfect. "Alex," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. The same voice he used on shareholders and troublesome board members. "This is difficult for all of us. You know how the market is shifting. We need a more agile approach, a new vision. And your role as Chief Operations Officer, it's become archaic. Archaic." I was 34 years old. I had built the company's entire logistical framework from the ground up. I had negotiated the supply chains that fed our workshops. I had designed the inventory systems that allowed our retail stores to function. My role wasn't archaic. It was the company's central nervous system. It was the plumbing. It was the foundation. It was all the unglamorous, essential, and utterly invisible work that allowed them to play their games. Caleb shifted in his chair, the fabric of his own expensive suit rustling. He was the new vision. As the freshly minted CEO title my father had bestowed upon him last Christmas, like a shiny new toy, Caleb was all about vision. He loved buzzwords like synergy and disruption and brand activation. He had no idea how a bolt of Italian leather got from a tannery in Florence to a craftsman's bench in our flagship workshop. But he could spend $500,000 on a party to launch a new watch he had no part in designing. That's just business. "Alex," Caleb said, trying for a tone of camaraderie that landed like a punch. "We're streamlining. Dad and I feel the company needs to be leaner, more aggressive. We're outsourcing the kind of back-end oversight you've been handling. Outsourcing. To a third-party firm that Caleb happened to play golf with, the CEO of a firm that would charge us twice what my entire department cost to run and do half the job." I had seen the proposal. It was a kickback scheme dressed up in a PowerPoint presentation. I had told my father as much 2 weeks ago. "I see. Now that my report was not a warning, it was my death warrant. Isabel, our head of public relations, finally decided to speak. "It will be better for you, Alex, really," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending sympathy one reserves for a sick pet. "You've been working so hard, always stuck in the details. Now you'll have time to find your passion." And that's when the laughter came. The thought of me, Alex the workhorse, Alex the fixer, Alex the ghost in the machine, out in the world finding my passion, was just too absurd for them to bear. I said nothing. I just sat there, my hands resting on my knees, and absorbed it. I watched the three of them, my family, my employers, my executioners. They had planned this, rehearsed it. They had their talking points ready. They expected me to argue, to plead, to get angry. They were braced for a scene. When I gave them nothing but silence, a flicker of uncertainty crossed their faces before being replaced by relief. I was making it easy for them. My father slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the table. "Your severance package, Alex? It's very generous. We've, of course, accounted for your years of service and your vested shares. Everything is in order. Our lawyers have been very thorough." I looked at the folder. It was embossed with a company crest, a stylized D, entwined with a lion. Strength, integrity, family. What a joke. Thank you, I said. My voice was quiet even. It didn't betray the cold, slow motion earthquake happening inside. I stood up, took the folder, and turned to leave. Alex, my father called out, a hint of genuine surprise in his tone. That's it? You have nothing to say? I paused at the door, my back to them. I thought about the 17-hour days I'd pulled to fix the customs crisis Caleb created last year. I thought about the time I personally drove a shipment of rare wood veneers across 3 states to meet a deadline for a billionaire's yacht a client Isabel had almost lost. I thought about 1,000 other sacrifices, 1,000 other moments where I had put this company and this family before myself. No, sir, I said, looking over my shoulder. There's nothing left to say. I walked out of the boardroom and closed the heavy oak door behind me, leaving them to the spoils. The walk to my office felt like moving through a dream. The familiar hallways, the low hum of the building, the scent of leather and wood polish, it was the backdrop to my entire adult life. I had started in the mailroom at 19. I knew every corner of this place, every employee by name. My office was not like theirs. There was no mahogany desk or a panoramic city view. It was a functional, modest space tucked away in the operational heart of the building. My desk was cluttered with shipping manifests, production schedules, and supplier contracts. My walls were covered in flowcharts and maps, webs of logic that connected our global enterprise. I began to pack. It didn't take long. I didn't have personal photos or decorative trinkets. My life here had been the work itself. I packed my reference books, my notebooks filled with years of data, and a small framed photo of my grandfather, the man who started it all. He was the one who had taught me the business, not as a glamorous brand, but as a complex machine that required constant, diligent care. Your father sees the crown, Alex, he told me once, a few months before he passed. Your brother sees the audience. You're the only one who sees the gears. Never forget that the gears are what make the crown turn. As I boxed up the last of my things, I could hear the faint pop of a champagne cork from the direction of the boardroom. They were celebrating. A wave of something hot and bitter washed over me, but I pushed it down. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. I carried my single box of belongings through the main office. A few heads popped up over cubicle walls. My assistant, Maria, a woman who had been with me for 10 years, stood up, her face a mask of confusion and concern. Mr. Davenport, what's going on? She whispered. I've been let go, Maria, I said, my voice low. My role has been made redundant. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. But you can't. You're everything. Not anymore, I said, managing a weak smile. Thank you for everything. You've been a wonderful colleague. I didn't wait for her reply. I couldn't. Her genuine distress was more painful than my family's feigned sympathy. I walked out of the building I had helped build into the gray afternoon and didn't look back. The drive to my apartment was a blur. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom condo downtown, a place of quiet order that was a world away from the sprawling family estate where Caleb and Isabel still lived, and which my father lorded over like a feudal king. I had bought my own place as soon as I could, needing a space that was mine, a space free of the suffocating weight of the Davenport legacy. I carried my box inside and set it on the dining table. The Severance folder lay on top. I stared at it for a long time. Very generous, my father had said. I knew what was inside. A check for a year's salary, a document outlining the forced sale of my vested minority shares back to the company at a predetermined, undervalued rate. It was designed to be just enough money to make me go away quietly, but not enough to ever be a threat. It was an insult wrapped in a legal document. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked into my study. This room was my sanctuary. One wall was all books, histories, biographies, books on logistics and economic theory. The other walls were bare. In the center of the room was a large, sturdy oak desk, and on that desk was a locked, fireproof safe. My hands were perfectly steady as I spun the combination dial. The tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying thud. I opened the heavy door. Inside, there was only one thing. It was not a weapon. It was not a stash of emergency cash. It was a book. It was bound in the same dark blue leather as the Severance folder, but it was much older. The cover was worn smooth at the edges. The gold leaf crest of the company faded with time. It was the original Articles of Incorporation and Company Charter for Davenport and Sons, signed by my grandfather, Thomas Davenport. 60 years ago, my grandfather had given it to me on my 21st birthday. Your father has a copy in his office safe, he had told me, his eyes serious. But he's never read it, not really. He sees it as a relic. But everything you need to know about this company is in here, Alex. The bones of it. Promise me you'll read it. All of it. And I had read it a dozen times. I knew every article, every bylaw, every ridiculously archaic-sounding clause. And I knew that my arrogant, dismissive family had never bothered. They relied on their high-priced lawyers to interpret the parts that mattered for modern business, and they ignored the rest as the ramblings of a dead patriarch. I carried the heavy book to my dining table and set it down next to the Severance folder. 2 testaments to my life, one a dismissal, the other a key. I opened the old charter. The paper was thick and creamy, yellowed with age. The text was dense, typed on an old-fashioned letterpress. I flipped through the familiar pages past the articles on share structures and board appointments until I reached the section I knew by heart. Article 4. Governance and contingencies. My eyes scanned down to Section B. It was titled, in stark, underlined letters, the Founder's Contingency Clause. It was a strange, almost feudal-sounding piece of legal architecture, born of my grandfather's deep distrust of the idle rich, a class he feared his own descendants might become. He believed the company's strength was not in its brand, but in its operational integrity. He wanted to ensure that someone who understood the gears of the machine would always be protected. I read the words, though I already knew them as well as my own name. In the event that a direct blood descendant of the founder, Thomas Davenport, holding a C-level operational title, including, but not limited to, Chief Operations Officer or equivalent, is terminated from their position without a vote of no confidence from a supermajority 75% of the board and without legally substantiated cause of gross negligence or criminal malfeasance. Said descendant's entire portfolio of vested shares shall be subject to immediate re-evaluation. My father, Caleb, and Isabel constituted only 60% of the board. They had not held a formal vote, and they had no cause. They had only their ambition. I continued reading, my heart a slow, heavy drum. Upon this triggering event, the re-evaluation shall enact a conversion of all said shares. According to the formula outlined in Appendix C, this conversion will be executed via an automatic and irrevocable drawdown from the Davenport Family Holding Trust, the primary repository of all class of voting shares, to constitute a final holding for the terminated party of no less than 51% of the total voting stock of Davenport and Sons Luxury Goods, 51%. Controlling interest. The company itself. I closed my eyes. The laughter in the boardroom echoed in my ears again. That little tinkle from Isabel. That low rumble from Caleb. They had laughed at the idea of me, the redundant drone, finding my passion. They had no idea. I had found my passion years ago. It was this company, and I had been quietly, patiently waiting for them to make the one mistake my grandfather had known they would eventually make. The mistake of underestimating the man who ran the machine. The mistake of forgetting to read the fine print. They thought they had fired me from my job. They had no idea they had just promoted me to their boss. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the old charter open on the table before me. The severance folder my father had given me seemed to shrink, becoming the pathetic, meaningless document it truly was. For 10 years, I had known this clause existed. For 5 years, since I had been promoted to coup, I had known it could apply to me. My quiet diligence, my willingness to take on the thankless tasks, my refusal to play their political games, it had all been part of a long, patient strategy. I had made myself indispensable, knowing that to a narcissist like my brother, indispensability in another is a threat that must be eliminated. I have let him walk right into the trap my grandfather had set 60 years ago. A slow smile spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile of grim, absolute certainty. The kind of smile a chess player makes when he sees a checkmate. 10 moves away, they had wanted a leaner, more aggressive company. They were about to get one. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I didn't call a friend. I didn't call my mother, who had long ago chosen to live in blissful ignorance of the family's uglier dynamics. I called the one man I had put on retainer 6 months ago for this exact moment. He answered on the second ring, Sterling. His voice was sharp, precise, and expensive. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my own voice calm and clear as glass. "It's Alexander Davenport." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Alexander, I was wondering when I might hear from you." "They did it," I said, looking at the founder's contingency clause, at the words that were my birthright. "And my weapon. They terminated my contract. It's time." Of course. Here's the second installment of our story, part 2 of 8. The following morning, I did not wake with the panicked, hollow feeling of a man who had just lost his job. I woke with the sharp, crystalline focus of a general on the morning of a campaign. The anger and the hurt from the day before had been alchemized overnight into something pure and hard. Purpose. My meeting with Arthur Sterling was at 9 a.m. His law firm, Sterling and Locke, occupied the top 2 floors of the city's newest and most severe skyscraper, a gleaming shard of glass and steel that looked down on the quaint, old money brick of the Davenport and Sons building. The contrast was deliberate. Sterling's office was an exercise in minimalist power. The walls were glass, offering a dizzying panoramic view of the city below. There was no mahogany, no worn leather, no portraits of ancestors. The furniture was stark Italian design, the desk a single massive slab of polished concrete. Arthur Sterling himself seemed forged from the same materials. He was tall, thin as a rail, with a face full of sharp angles and eyes the color of a winter sky. His suit was a shade of charcoal, so dark it was almost black. He wasn't a lawyer you hired for a friendly settlement. He was a weapon you aimed at an enemy. "Alexander," he said, not standing, but gesturing to the single chair opposite his desk. "Punctual. I appreciate that." He had 2 documents laid out before him, a copy of the original Davenport charter I had provided him months ago, and the severance folder my father had given me. I spent last night reviewing these. Sterling began, his voice dry as dust. He tapped a long, elegant finger on the charter. "This is a fascinating piece of corporate architecture. Your grandfather was either a paranoid genius or he simply knew his descendants very, very well. The founder's contingency clause is a thing of beautiful, brutal elegance. It's an heirloom, a time bomb, and a loyalty test all in one. And your father, brother, and sister, they failed the test spectacularly. I felt a grim sense of validation. You're confident it's ironclad? Ironclad." Sterling allowed himself a thin, bloodless smile. "Alexander, this clause, is hermetically sealed. It's not a loophole. It's a load-bearing wall in the very foundation of the company. Their termination of your employment, done without a 75% board vote and without cause, is the one specific key that fits this one specific lock. The language is unambiguous. The drawdown from the family trust is automatic and, my favorite word in the entire English language, irrevocable. He picked up the severance folder and held it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a soiled handkerchief. And this is the proof of their incompetence. This document, wherein they formally terminate your employment and admit you are entitled to your vested shares, is the very instrument that triggers your grandfather's clause. They've signed a confession without even realizing a crime was committed. It's breathtaking. The relief I felt was so profound it was almost dizzying. For years, I had held this knowledge alone, wondering if I had misinterpreted it, if some modern law had rendered it obsolete. To hear it affirmed by a man like Sterling was to feel the ground solidify beneath my feet. So, what's the first move? I asked. The first move is not a lawsuit, Sterling said, his eyes gleaming with professional zeal. A lawsuit is a messy public affair. This is a simple private execution of an existing corporate mandate. We don't ask, we inform. My team is already drafting the notices. He laid out the strategy, his voice a calm, precise scalpel. Step 1, formal notification. We will deliver a package of documents simultaneously to each member of the board, your father, Caleb, Isabel, and the 2 non-family members, Mr. Albright and Mrs. Chen. A separate package will be delivered to the legal counsel for the Davenport family holding trust. The notice will be simple, he continued. It will state that as of 3:15 p.m. yesterday, the conditions for the invocation of Article 4, Section B have been met. It will include a copy of the charter with the relevant clause highlighted, a copy of their own severance letter as evidence of the triggering event, and a formal declaration of the immediate transfer of controlling interest to you. Step 2, he said, leaning forward slightly, is the demand. The notice will conclude with a formal demand for an emergency board meeting to be held within 48 hours, as stipulated in the company bylaws for matters of shareholder succession. A meeting at which you, as the new majority shareholder, will preside. My mind raced, picturing the scene, the shock, the disbelief, the rage. When do we send the notices? I asked. Sterling considered this for a moment. Friday afternoon is for cowards. You let the panic simmer over a weekend, and they might have time to rally, to find some third-rate lawyer who'll give them false hope. No, we do this on Monday morning. At 10 a.m. sharp, we detonate this in the middle of their first executive meeting of the week. We shatter their sense of order. We let the chaos consume their entire business day, their entire week. We give them no time to think, only to react. It was perfect. It was brutal. It was exactly what I was paying him for. I spent the weekend in a state of suspended animation. My apartment felt like a waiting room. I was no longer an employee of Davenport and Sons, but I was not yet its master. I was a ghost, haunting the space between 2 lives. I tried to read, but the words wouldn't settle. I tried to watch a movie, but the plot seemed trivial. My mind was consumed with running through the scenarios. I could hear Caleb's apoplectic screaming, Isabel's panic sobs. I could picture my father's face, that carefully constructed mask of patriarchal authority crumbling to reveal the furious, impotent man beneath. I felt a pang of something complex, something that resembled grief. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was the final formal severing of family ties. But the grief was quickly overwhelmed by the memory of their laughter. That sound had cauterized the wound. There was nothing left to bleat out to distract myself. I turned to the work. I pulled out my old notebooks, the ones filled with the plans, and proposals that had been dismissed or ignored for years. A plan to modernize our supply chain, saving millions. A proposal for a new line of more accessible luxury goods to attract a younger demographic. A strategy to invest in our artisans, to create a true master apprentice program that would preserve the company's soul. Something my grandfather had always dreamed of. For years, I had watched as Caleb chased fleeting trends and my father clung to an outdated model of business. I had watched them starve the foundations of the company to pay for the glittering facade. Now, spreading my plans across my dining room table, I wasn't just plotting a takeover. I was planning a rescue mission. The anger that had fueled me was now refining itself into a cold, clear vision. This was not just about revenge. It was about redemption. The redemption of my grandfather's legacy. Monday morning arrived, crisp and clear. I dressed not in a suit, but in a simple, dark sweater and gray trousers. I was not going to the office. As per Sterling's advice, I was to remain completely unseen. A phantom pulling the strings from a far dot at 9:55 a.m. I made coffee and sat by the window in my living room. My phone was on the table beside me, silent. Sterling's team was in motion. I pictured the Blacktown cars pulling up, the grim-faced process servers with their leather satchels. The synchronized walk into the Davenport building. My mind drifted to the boardroom. I could see it perfectly. My father would be at the head of the table. Caleb would be beside him, probably boasting about some new marketing campaign. Isabel would be scrolling through her phone, checking the social media engagement on a post about a new handbag. They would be comfortable, secure, basking in the glow of their triumph over me. 10:M. The second hand on my watch swept past. The 12. It was done. The bomb had been delivered. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. The silence in my apartment was absolute. I imagined the confusion in the boardroom, the rustle of expensive paper, the dawning horror, the frantic, whispered consultations, the panicked call to the company lawyers who would already have received their own package and would be staring, dumbfounded at the 60-year-old clause that had just disemboweled their client's dot at 10:23 a.m. My phone rang. The screen flashed with a name I knew would be calling for the rest of my life. Caleb. I let it ring for a full 10 seconds, then took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. I pressed the answer button and held the phone to my ear. I said nothing. You. The sound was a strangled, incoherent roar of pure rage. It was barely a word. You son of a bitch. What is this? What did you do? I could hear papers being thrown. A woman, Isabel, sobbing hysterically in the background. Good morning. Caleb, I said, my voice so calm it felt like it belonged to someone else. I assume you've received the documents? Documents? It's insane. It's illegal. Dad's lawyers are. You can't do this. The company is ours. He screamed, his voice cracking. The company, I said, savoring each word, belongs to the majority shareholder. And as of Friday afternoon, that is me. I refer you to Article 4, Section B of the company charter. Your lawyers will find. It's all in order. I'm going to destroy you, Alex. I'm going to sue you into the ground. I don't think so, I said, my voice dropping, losing its false pleasantry and taking on the chill of steel. Mr. Sterling is handling my legal affairs, and he's rather looking forward to any challenges you'd care to mount. Now, I can't understand you when you're shouting. We can discuss this and your future with the company at the emergency. Board meeting I've scheduled for Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. I paused, letting the silence stretch. I'll be presiding, I continued. I suggest you and Father and Isabel read the documents from my lawyer very carefully. Welcome to the new vision for Davenport and Sons. Before he could unleash, Another torrent of impotent rage. I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the table. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now. It was the calm, clean silence of absolute victory. The first stage was over. The shockwave had hit. Now, all I had to do was wait for Wednesday and walk into the boardroom to claim my kingdom. Of course. Here's the third installment of our story. Part 3 of 8. The silence that followed Caleb's rage-fueled. Phone call was a new kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, expectant quiet of the past 2 days. It was the deep, profound calm that follows a detonation. The dust was still settling, but the primary explosion was over. I had leveled their world with a single phone call, and now I sat in the tranquil epicenter of the blast zone. My phone, which had been a source of anxiety, was now a tool of observation. As predicted, it lit up again almost immediately. This time it was Isabel. I ignored it. A text message followed, a frantic jumble of typos and exclamation points. Isabel, Alex, what is the Slayer saying? Dad is going to have a heart attack. You can't do this to us. We're your family. I read the message, feeling a distant, clinical pity. She still thought that word family was a shield she could hide behind, a magic incantation that could undo legal reality. She had no idea that they themselves had burned that shield to ash when they laughed me out of the boardroom. Next came my father. His name, Father, appeared on my screen. A name I'd assigned in a moment of youthful formality that now seemed perfectly, coldly appropriate. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Unlike the others, he didn't try to call back. Immediately, he was a man who hated showing desperation. His first attempt had failed. He would now retreat, confer with his own lawyers, and plan a new line of attack. He would be furious, but his fury would be filtered through layers of pride and arrogance. He wouldn't stoop to screaming at me like Caleb. He would try to crush me with the weight of his authority, not realizing that his authority no longer existed. I spent the rest of Monday in quiet preparation. I did not celebrate. I did not drink. I ordered a simple dinner and spread my plans across the dining table, the same table where I had once eaten takeout while poring over shipping manifests for their company. Now I was redesigning its future. I worked late into the night, refining my proposals. My focus was absolute. For every problem I had identified over the years, the bloated marketing budget, the inefficient production pipeline, the neglect of our core artisan staff, I drafted a solution. I created new organizational charts, new budget projections, new strategic roadmaps. I was not just planning a palace coup. I was planning a government. On Tuesday morning, I met with Arthur Sterling again. His office, with its sterile beauty and panoramic view, felt like my new headquarters. The hornet's nest has been kicked, he said, a glint of amusement in his cold eyes. Their lead counsel, a man named Bob Peterson, has called my office 5 times. First he blustered, then he threatened. Then he tried to plead for a preliminary discussion. I informed him that all discussions would take place at the board meeting, as requested by the new majority shareholder. Sterling gestured to a stack of freshly printed documents on his concrete desk. This is the agenda for tomorrow's meeting. Your agenda. We spent the next 2 hours going through it, point by point. It was a masterwork of corporate warfare. The first item was a simple, formal recognition of shareholder control, which would involve a reading of the charter's clause and a formal acknowledgement from the board, or what was left of it, of my new position. Sterling assured me that their lawyers would have advised them that fighting this was futile. They would be forced to concede. The second item was restructuring of the board of directors. Here, Sterling said, tapping the paper, is where you decapitate the old regime. You have the right, as majority shareholder, to remove and appoint board members. You will start by removing your father, Caleb, and Isabel. My breath caught for a second. It was one thing to imagine it, Another to see it written on an official agenda. And who replaces them? I asked. For now, no one, Sterling advised. You shrink the board to 3 members, yourself and the 2 non-family members, Albright and Chun. A smaller, more agile board is easier to control. It also sends a message. The era of family entitlement is over. From now on, a seat on the board of Davenport and Sons will be earned, not inherited. The remaining items on the agenda were a systematic dismantling of my family's power structure, a vote to terminate Caleb's contract as CEO for gross mismanagement, citing the disastrous outsourcing deal as Exhibit A motion to dissolve. Isabel's entire PR department, which was little more than a vanity project, and consolidate its essential functions under a new, leaner marketing division. A full, independent audit of the company's finances for the past 5 years, with a special focus on executive expenses. Each point was a carefully sharpened stake aimed at the heart of their control. By the end of the meeting, they would be left with nothing but their now minority shares and the empty shells of their former titles. They will not take this well, Sterling stated in what was perhaps the greatest understatement I had ever heard. I'm not paying you for them to take it well, I replied. I'm paying you for it to be final. That afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. Mr. Davenport, Alexander. The voice was calm, female, and familiar. It was Eleanor Chen, one of the 2 independent board members. She was a quiet, fiercely intelligent woman who had made a fortune in logistics. Before retiring to a life of quiet investing and board oversight, Mrs. Chun, I said, surprised. Hello. I trust you can imagine the atmosphere here, she said, her voice dry. I'm calling from my car. I just left the building. I've been in a 3-hour meeting with your father and his lawyers. It was theatrical. I can only imagine, I said. They're in denial, she said bluntly. Richard thinks this is a negotiation. He thinks he can offer you a bigger severance, a new title, and make this go away. Caleb is threatening to burn the company to the ground rather than see you in charge. And Isabel. Well, Isabel is mostly just weeping into very expensive tissues. Her frankness was refreshing. In all my years at the company, I had respected Eleanor Chun. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words were backed by data and ruthless logic. I wanted to call you for 2 reasons, she continued. First, to tell you that from a legal and corporate governance standpoint, your position is unassailable. My own lawyers have confirmed it. Any attempt by your father to fight this will be a waste of time and shareholder money. I told him as much. He did not appreciate it. Thank you, Eleanor, I said sincerely. Second, she said, her voice dropping slightly, I wanted to let you know that you have my full support, and I believe you will have Robert Albright's as well. We have been concerned about the direction Caleb and your father have been taking the company for some time. Their focus on brand over quality, on vanity over profit, it's been alarming. Your reputation for operational excellence precedes you. Frankly, Alexander, many of us who care about the long-term health of this company see this coup not as a disaster, but as a desperately needed course correction. I was stunned into silence. I had expected a fight from everyone. I had been so focused on my family as my opponents that I hadn't considered the possibility of allies. That means a great deal to me, Eleanor. I finally managed to say, Good. She replied, Then I will see you on Wednesday morning. Do not let your father bully you. He's a lion with no teeth now. I'll roar. We hung up, and for the first time in days, I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with revenge. It was the feeling of being seen, of being validated by someone whose opinion I genuinely respected. Eleanor's call solidified my resolve. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was a duty. a duty to my grandfather's legacy, and to the employees and shareholders who had been betrayed by my family's incompetence. That evening, my father called again. This time I answered. "Alex," he said. His voice was not angry. It was cold, heavy, and dripping with menace. The feigned regret was gone, replaced by the unvarnished tyrant I knew lay beneath. "Father," I replied, my tone matching his for coldness. "This foolishness ends now," he said, not as a request, but as a command. "You will call off your attack dog lawyer. You will tear up this ridiculous claim. We will reinstate you, find a new title for you, and put this unfortunate episode behind us. You will not destroy this family." "The family," I said, my voice quiet, "was destroyed when you and your children laughed at me in that boardroom. The company, however, can be saved. And that is what I intend to do." "You have no idea what you're up against," he hissed. "I built this company?" "No," I corrected him calmly. "Grandfather built this company. I ran it. You and Caleb and Isabel nearly broke it. Your tenure is over. I will see you at the board meeting tomorrow morning. We have much to discuss." I hung up before he could reply. I cut the final cord. The conversation was over, not just for tonight, but forever. Wednesday morning, I rose before dawn. The city was still a sea of glittering darkness. I showered and dressed with a ceremonial slowness. I did not put on a suit. A suit was what I wore when I worked for them. A suit was armor. I did not need armor today. I needed a uniform. I chose a pair of dark, perfectly tailored trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a simple dark blue cashmere sweater. It was understudded, comfortable, and elegant. It was a look that communicated power without shouting about it. It was the opposite of everything my brother Caleb represented. As I stood before the mirror, I saw not the harried, overlooked coup I had been for years. I saw a man who looked calm, confident, and utterly in control. I saw the rightful heir. At 8:30, I left my apartment. I didn't take a taxi. I walked. The morning air was cool and crisp. The city was waking up, the streets filling with people on their way to work. It felt good to be among them, to be a part of the city's rhythm. When I arrived at the Davenport building, I did not use the main entrance. I walked around to a side door, a service entrance I had used 1,000 times when visiting the workshops. Late at night, I took the service elevator, bypassing the grand marble lobby and the receptionists, who would be paralyzed with indecision at my arrival. The elevator opened onto the executive floor. It was quiet. The workday hadn't fully begun. I walked down the familiar hallway, my footsteps echoing softly on the plush carpet. I passed Isabel's office, then Caleb's. Their doors closed. I stopped before the double oak doors of the boardroom, the place of my humiliation, the place of my rebirth. I could hear the low murmur of voices from within. They were all there, waiting. I took a deep breath. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a cold, quiet resolve. My grandfather had built the gears. I had kept them running. Now, it was time to take the crown. I pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The boardroom was a tableau of shock and resentment. The air was thick with it, heavy and cold like the air in a tomb. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a position he had occupied for 30 years, his face a stony mask of controlled fury. Caleb, to his right, was vibrating with a barely suppressed rage, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. Isabel, to his left, looked as though she had been crying for 48 hours straight. Her makeup was a mess, and her eyes were wide with a kind of pathetic, uncomprehending fear. On the other side of the table sat Eleanor Chun and Robert Albright, the two independent board members. They both looked grim, resolute, like jurors about to deliver a difficult but necessary verdict. Behind my family sat their lawyer, Bob Peterson, a man whose florid face was already beating with sweat. And in the corner, a silent, hawk-like presence, was my own counsel, Arthur Sterling. They all stared at me as I closed the doors behind me. The soft click of the latch was the only sound. I did not take one of the empty chairs along the side. I walked, my footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug, directly to the head of the table, to my father's chair. I stopped just behind it. He stared up at me, his eyes burning with a cold, hateful fire. "Alexander," he began, his voice a low growl of command. "This circus has gone on long enough. You will sit and you will listen." I looked down at him, my expression unreadable. "No," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "You will. That is no longer your seat." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The authority in my tone was absolute. For a moment, he looked as if he might refuse, as if his pride would physically prevent him from moving. I saw a flicker of defiance, but then he looked into my eyes and saw nothing there for him to appeal to, no fear, no doubt, no lingering filial affection. He saw only the cold, hard mechanics of a corporate action. His lawyer, Peterson, gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, slowly. With the stiff movements of an old king being deposed, my father stood and moved to an empty chair on the side. The power in the room shifted so palpably it was almost a physical force. It flowed away from him and consolidated around me. I took my seat at the head of the table. "My rightful seat, good morning," I said into the thick silence. "I hereby call to order this emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Davenport and Sons. The purpose of this meeting is to address the recent and significant change in shareholder control. Let the record show that all board members are present." I paused, letting my gaze rest on each of them. "The first item on the agenda," I continued, my voice calm and formal, "is the formal recognition of shareholder control. Mr. Sterling, if you would be so kind as to read the relevant section of the company charter for the record." Sterling stood, his thin smile revealing a chilling satisfaction. He read Article 4, Section B, his voice clear and cutting, each word falling like a hammer blow. He read my father's own termination letter aloud as proof of the triggering event. When he was finished, he sat down. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." I said, "The charter is clear. I now ask the board to formally recognize the transfer of a 51% controlling interest to me, Alexander Davenport. All in favor?" Eleanor Chun's voice was crisp. "Aye." Robert Albright's was a low rumble. "Aye." I looked to the other side of the table. My family sat in stunned, hateful silence. "The motion carries," I declared. "Let the record show that my position as majority shareholder is now formally recognized by this board." Caleb made a strangled sound, half gasp, half sob. I ignored him. "Item number 2, I said, moving on without pause. Restructuring of the board of directors. This was it. The blade. I moved to remove Richard Davenport, Caleb Davenport, and Isabel Davenport from the board of directors of this company, effective immediately. The reaction was instantaneous, a detonation of emotion. "You can't." Isabel shrieked, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "This is our company. Our name is on the building." Caleb shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You snake!" he roared, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. "You cowardly, pathetic snake. You've been planning this all along." "Sit down, Caleb," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He remained standing, trembling with rage. I said, "Sit down." My father, for his part, said nothing. He simply stared at me, his face a mask of such profound loathing that it was almost supernatural. He looked at me as if I were a stranger who had murdered his son. "This is not a negotiation," I stated, my eyes fixed on my brother. "It is a motion put forward by the majority shareholder." My vote carries the motion. The decision is final. Are there any objections on procedural grounds, Mr. Peterson? Their lawyer looked miserable. He stared at his legal pad and shook his head. No, sir, there are none. Then the motion carries, I said. Richard, Caleb, Isabel, you are no longer members of this board. For the remainder of this meeting, you will hold the status of minority shareholders. You will have no vote, and you will not speak again unless you are directly addressed by me. The three of them stared, speechless. I had not only fired them from their jobs, I had just fired them from their own family, legally and formally, severing their authority over the empire that had defined their lives. I gave them no time to process. I moved to the next item on the agenda, my voice a relentless, steady engine of dismantlement. Item 3, a vote on the tenure of the CEO. I announced. I gestured to Sterling, who placed a single-page document in front of Eleanor and Robert. Before you is a summary of the financial damage incurred by the outsourcing deal initiated by Mr. Caleb Davenport, a deal which, as we now know, stood to benefit his personal associates at a catastrophic cost to this company. Based on this evidence of gross mismanagement, I vote to terminate the employment of Caleb Davenport, effective immediately. All in favor? Eleanor and Robert both raised their hands without hesitation. Aye. The motion carries, I said, looking directly at my brother, whose face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. Caleb, your access to all company systems has been revoked. Please have your personal belongings cleared from your office. By 5 p.m. today, our head of security, Mr. Davies, will escort you. He sank back into his chair, a broken, gasping man. Item 4, I continued, turning my gaze to my sister. The dissolution of the Public Relations Department and the termination of its head. Isabel let out a small, wounded cry. PR department's budget has grown by 300% over the past 2 years with no discernible return on investment. I stated, quoting figures from memory. It has functioned primarily as a vanity project. Its essential duties will be absorbed by a new, more efficient marketing division that will be under my direct oversight. Isabel, your position has been made redundant. Your employment is terminated. The word hung in the air between us, redundant, the same word they had used on me. The same casual, dismissive cruelty. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, her sobs now ragged and unrestrained. I felt nothing. Finally, I said, my voice dropping as I looked at my father. Item 5. I am commissioning a full, independent forensic audit of all company financials for the past 60 months. The audit will be conducted by an outside firm, and its mandate will be to examine all executive expense accounts, discretionary spending, and intercompany transfers. Any and all irregularities discovered will be reported to the relevant authorities. The threat was unmistakable. This was no longer just about a corporate takeover. It was about accountability. It was about consequences. My father's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The audit was not a tool to investigate Caleb's or Isabel's petty extravagances. It was a weapon aimed directly at him, and he knew it. With the formal business concluded, I stood up. I placed my hands on the back of the chair, my chair, and looked at the 3 shattered people who had once been my family. For my entire life, I have dedicated myself to this company, I said, my voice low and clear. I managed its heart, its bones, its gears, while you concerned yourselves with the paint and the polish. I worked to build its value while you worked to spend it. Last week, in this very room, you dismissed my life's work. You called me archaic, and you laughed. I let the memory of that laughter hang in the air for a moment. You thought I was a ghost in the machine, an afterthought, a functionary you could simply delete. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locking onto my father's, But you forgot the most important rule. The man who understands the machine, who builds the machine, and who oils the machine, owns the machine. I straightened up. My grandfather built this company on a foundation of quality and integrity. You allowed that foundation to crack. Today, we begin the repairs. Today, the age of entitlement at Davenport and Sons is over. Today, we get back to work. I looked at each of them one last time, at Isabel's tears, Caleb's slack-jawed shock, and my father's silent, bottomless fury. This meeting is adjourned, I said. I gathered my single sheet of paper, the agenda, and turned my back on them. I walked out of the boardroom without a second glance, leaving Arthur Sterling to oversee the legal practicalities. I didn't need to see the aftermath. I could feel it behind me. The sound of a world ending. The sound of a new one. Beginning. My new one. I walked out of the boardroom and did not look back. The sounds from within, a shattered sob from Isabel, a guttural roar of fury from Caleb, followed by the deep, resonant slam of my father's fist on the mahogany table faded. Behind me as the heavy oak doors swung shut, Arthur Sterling remained behind, a shark left in a tank of bleeding fish to handle the legal carnage. My part in that particular battle was done. The executive floor was unnervingly quiet, the air humming with the silent electricity of scandal. The few assistants and junior executives at their desks stared at me with wide, terrified eyes as I walked past. They had heard the shouting. They had seen me enter. They saw me leave alone. They were smart enough to connect the dots. I was no longer Alex the Coup, the quiet workhorse. I was something new, something to be feared. I did not go to the elevators. Instead, I took the private stairwell at the end of the hall, the one that led down into the heart of the company. I descended from the rarefied air of corporate intrigue into the real world of Davenport and Sons. The workshops, the scent of cedar, beeswax, and tanned leather filled my lungs. The percussive music of the workshop, the tap, tap, tap of a craftsman's hammer, the low whir of a polishing wheel, the rhythmic slice of a blade through hide, was the company's true heartbeat. This was the floor where value is actually created. It was the floor my father had not visited in a decade. Heads turned as I walked the floor. The artisans, men and women with decades of skill in their hands, paused their work, their expressions. A mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I saw Mateo, our head leather worker, a man whose hands could coax a stitch line so perfect it looked like it had been drawn by a machine. He had taught me how to tool leather when I was a teenager. Alex, he said, his voice cautious. He wiped his hands on his thick canvas apron. We heard shouting. There have been some changes in management, Mateo, I said, my voice calm and respectful. I ran my hand over a supple piece of deep blue alligator skin lying on his workbench. Significant changes. Good changes or bad changes? He asked, his eyes searching mine. Changes that will put the focus of this company back in this room, I said. Back in the hands of the people who actually build things. We're going to invest in new tools. We're going to start a real apprenticeship program like I've always talked about. We're going to value craftsmanship over marketing. A slow smile spread across Mateo's weathered face. It was the first genuine smile I had seen all day. That, he said, is a very good change. That small interaction was everything. It was the first brick I laid in the foundation of my new regime. I spent an hour on that floor, speaking quietly with the artisans, the finishers, the designers. I didn't give a speech. I just listened. I reminded them that I was one of them, that I understood the work, that their future was now secure. The fear in their eyes was replaced by a dawning sense of hope. Finally, I ascended back to the silent, tense executive floor. It was time to claim my territory. I walked directly to the opulent corner office, the CEO's office. The door was ajar. Caleb was inside. He hadn't been throwing things. He was simply standing by the massive rosewood desk, his desk, my father's desk, staring out the window, his back to me. He looked smaller than he had in the boardroom, deflated. The deadline has been moved up. Caleb, I said from the doorway. He flinched, but didn't turn around. You always wanted this, didn't you? He said, his voice thick and hoarse. All those years, pretending to be the quiet, dutiful son, you were just waiting, a snake in the grass. You're wrong, I said, stepping into the room. I never wanted this. I wanted to do my job. I wanted to help build this company. You're the one who couldn't stand having someone competent in the room. You had to get rid of me. That was your mistake. He finally turned to face me. His face was pale, his eyes shot with red. Dad will ruin you for this. He'll ruin the company. He'll burn it all to the ground before he lets you have it. He can try, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Now it's time for you to go. Mr. Davies is waiting for you in the hall. Right on cue, the imposing figure of our head of security appeared in the doorway. Caleb looked from Mr. Davies to me, his mouth opening and closing silently. All the fight had gone out of him. There was nothing left but the pathetic, empty shell of an entitled man who had just had his world taken from him. He grabbed his briefcase and, without another word, allowed himself to be escorted out of his own office like a common trespasser. The moment he was gone, I turned to his desk. It was cluttered with tacky, expensive desk toys, golf trophies, and invitations to galas. I swept the entire collection into a nearby trash can with one fluid motion. I then called building services. I need everything in the CEO's office removed, I ordered. The desk, the chairs, the paintings, everything. I want it stripped to the walls. An hour later, as movers were hauling away the last vestiges of my brother's and father's reign, Isabel appeared in the doorway. She had repaired her makeup, but her eyes were still puffy and red. She was holding a small box of her own belongings. Alex, please, she began, her voice trembling. Don't do this. What am I supposed to do? My whole life is this company. No, Isabel, I said, turning to face her from the center of the now empty room. Your whole life was the money from this company, the status it gave you. You never cared about the work. That's not true. She cried. Isn't it? I asked. You laughed when I was fired. You called my job archaic. You thought it was for the best. Perhaps this is for the best, too. It's time for you to find your passion. The words, her own words, struck her like a physical blow. She recoiled, her face crumpling. I felt a flicker of something, but I extinguished it. Pity was a luxury I could not afford. My severance package was for 1 year's salary. I said, my voice flat. I will authorize the exact same for you. It's very generous. You have until the end of the day to clear your office. She stared at me, her mouth agape, searching for the brother she thought she knew, but he was gone. She turned and fled, her sobs echoing down the hall. By late afternoon, the office was a blank canvas. The opulent, heavy furniture was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant oak desk, the one from my old 2 office, which I had brought up, and a few functional chairs. The gaudy modern art was gone, leaving the walls bare for now. It was a space for work, not for holding court. From my new desk, I drafted a company-wide email. Subject: a new direction for Davenport and Sons to all employees. As of this morning, there has been a significant change in the leadership of our company. I, Alexander Davenport, have assumed the role of CEO and majority shareholder. Caleb Davenport and Isabel Davenport are no longer with the company, and Richard Davenport has been retired from the board. These changes are effective immediately. I know that such transitions can create uncertainty. Let me be clear. My commitment is to the foundational principles upon which my grandfather built this company: unparalleled quality, unwavering integrity, and a deep respect for the artisans who are the lifeblood of our brand. For too long, these principles have been sidelined. That ends today. We will be a company that invests in its people, that rewards skill and dedication, and that focuses on creating real, lasting value. Not fleeting headlines. To that end, I have commissioned a full, independent forensic audit of our finances to ensure complete transparency moving forward. There will be an all-hands meeting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in the main atrium, where I will discuss my vision for our future in greater detail. Until then, I ask you to continue the excellent work you have always done. The future of Davenport and Sons is bright, and it begins now. Sincerely, Alexander Davenport, CEOI. Hit send. The message was delivered to every computer in the company, a digital proclamation that the old kingdom was dead. As dusk fell over the city, I stood at the great expansive window in my new office, the lights of the skyline twinkling to life. Before me, the adrenaline of the day had finally faded, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion and the immense, crushing weight of my new reality. My phone rang. It was Sterling. "A clean kill, Alexander," his voice said, a note of professional admiration in it. "They're broken. Peterson has already called to discuss the terms of their physical exit from the building. However, do not mistake a lost battle for a finished war." "My father," I said. "It wasn't a question. Richard Davenport is a proud man with very deep pockets and a long memory," Sterling warned. "He lost control of the company. Now he will try to destroy its value. He will go to the press. He will try to poach clients. He will use every ounce of his social and financial leverage to make your life and the life of this company a living hell. Be prepared. The fight has just moved to a new front." We hung up. The warning settled over me. I looked down at the city, at the endless river of headlights, at the millions of lives moving in the darkness below. I had won. I had the power. I had the company. I had avenged my humiliation and reclaimed my grandfather's legacy. I was the king of the castle, and I had never, in my entire life, felt so completely and utterly alone. The morning of the all-hands meeting, the company was a living thing, humming with a nervous, electric energy. I could feel it the moment I stepped out of the service elevator onto the main floor. It was in the way people gathered in small, hushed groups around the coffee stations, the way conversations stopped abruptly when I walked past, the way every eye followed me with a mixture of fear, awe, and desperate curiosity. They weren't just employees. They were citizens of a fallen kingdom, waiting to see if their new ruler was a tyrant or a savior. I had spent the early morning hours not in a state of nervous rehearsal, but in quiet focus. My notes for the speech were a single index card with 3 words written on it: truth, craft, future. This would not be a speech full of Caleb's empty corporate jargon or my father's condescending paternalism. It would be a statement of intent as simple and strong as a well-made joint in a piece of furniture. At precisely 10 a.m. I walked into the grand central atrium of the Davenport building. The space, usually a quiet marble-floored expanse, was filled with hundreds of people. The artisans from the workshop stood in their practical work clothes, their arms crossed, their faces skeptical but attentive. The retail and sales staff, flown in from our flagship stores, were clustered together, their sharp suits a stark contrast to the craftsmen's aprons. And scattered throughout were the office workers, the logistics planners, the accountants, the administrative staff who kept the machine running. They were all there, a sea of anxious faces turned towards a small, unadorned platform that had been set up at the base of the grand staircase. I walked onto the platform. There was no fanfare, no introductory music, just me, a microphone, and the collective held breath of the entire company. Good morning, I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous space. Thank you all for being here. I know there are a lot of rumors and a great deal of uncertainty right now. I'm not going to hide from it, so let's start with the truth. I gripped the sides of the lectern. As of yesterday, my father, my brother, and my sister are no longer in leadership positions at this company. This was not a gradual transition. It was an abrupt and necessary change. For years, I watched the values of this company, the values my grandfather instilled in every joint, every stitch, and every design be eroded. I watched as our reputation for quality was leveraged to fund vanity projects. I watched as our focus shifted from the product we create to the parties we throw. The name on our door, Davenport, does not grant a birthright to mismanagement. That era is over. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. It was a bold, almost brutal opening, but it was honest. I know what you were thinking, I continued. What does this mean for me? For my job? So let me make a new covenant with you. Today, a new set of promises. I looked towards the artisans, making eye contact with Mateo. To our craftspeople, you are the heart of this company. Your skill is our most valuable asset. From this day forward, you will want for nothing. You will have the best tools, the best materials, and the unwavering support of my office. We are immediately reinstating the Master Apprentice program my grandfather started, and we will pay our senior artisans a bonus to train the next generation. Your legacy will be the future of this company. I saw Mateo nod, a slow, deep gesture of approval. A few of the other workshop veterans exchanged surprised, pleased glances. I then turned my attention to the sharply dressed sales staff. To our sales teams and retail associates, you are our ambassadors. I know it has become harder to sell our products with conviction when you know the quality is not what it once was. That changes now. I promise you a product you can believe. And again, a product whose quality speaks for itself, so you no longer have to rely on smoke and mirrors. We will succeed based on substance, not spin. Finally, I looked to the sea of office workers, the people I had worked alongside for 15 years. To our operations, finance, and administrative staff, you are the skeleton that gives this company its structure. Your work, though often invisible, is essential. Your reward for efficiency will no longer be to see the savings squandered on executive whims. We are freezing all non-essential executive-level spending. The money saved will be reinvested in two things: technology that makes your jobs more effective, and a new, transparent, merit-based bonus structure for every single employee in this company. From now on, when Davenport and Son succeeds, we all succeed. The murmur in the crowd was changing. It was no longer anxious. It was hopeful. I know that promises are easy to make from a stage, I said, my voice softening. So I will end with this. There are those outside this company who would prefer that we fail. They will be loud. They will spread rumors. They will attack our brand. We will not engage in a war of words. We will answer with the undeniable, uncompromising quality of our work. That will be our only response. That will be our victory. I paused. That is all I have to say. I will now take any questions you might have. A hush fell over the crowd. Taking questions was unheard of. My father only ever spoke in proclamations. After a tense moment, a hand went up. It was Maria, my former assistant, Alex. Mr. Davenport, she said, her voice nervous but clear. A lot of us here have been loyal to this company for a long time. We've been loyal to your family with this. This change, should we be worried about our jobs? Are there more redundancies to come? The word hung in the air. My word. Isabel's word. The question on everyone's mind. Thank you, Maria, I said, looking directly at her. That is a fair question, and the answer is no. I have no intention of cutting staff. I believe we don't have a problem with our people. We have had a problem with our priorities. My goal is not to shrink this company, but to grow it, to make it so strong, so successful, and so focused on quality that we will need to hire more people, not less. Your job is secure. Your loyalty will be rewarded. The only people who needed to worry about their positions at this company are already gone. A wave of relief washed over the atrium, so palpable it was almost a sound. A few people began to clap, then a few more. Within seconds, the entire atrium was filled with applause. It was not a thunderous, reverent ovation for a king. It was something better. It was a warm, hopeful applause of support, of belief. I stepped down from the platform and, instead of heading back to the executive elevator, I walked directly towards Matteo and the artisans. You mentioned needing a new CNC machine for the woodshop last year, I said to him, my voice now at a normal volume, the 5-axis model. You said it would cut down production time on the intricate inlay work by 40%. Matteo's eyes widened. Yes, Richard, your father said it was too expensive. Order it today, I said. Send the invoice directly to my office. I'll approve it myself this afternoon. The message spread through the crowd faster than any email could have. He's ordering the CNC machine. It was the first proof that my words were not just words. They were a contract. The rest of the day was a blur of decisive action. I met with the heads of finance and HR and gave them their mandates for the audit and the new bonus structure. I met with the design team and greenlit 2 projects that had been shelved by Caleb for being not flashy enough. I was clearing away the rot, a piece at a time, as the afternoon light began to fade. I was in my office reviewing production schedules when my phone buzzed. It was a news alert forwarded from Sterling. The headline was from a prominent financial gossip site known for its vicious anonymous takedowns. Davenport in peril. Brutal son ousts founding father in corporate coup. Clicked the link. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. It was filled with quotes from a source close to the family. It painted me as a cold, calculating, and unstable usurper. It claimed Richard Davenport had been forced into retirement by his own son's shocking and aggressive power grab. It quoted another insider who worried that my lack of market-facing experience would crater the brand within 6 months. It was my father's first salvo, fired from the safety of the shadows, my new head of marketing. A sharp young woman I'd promoted from within that afternoon rushed into my office, her tablet in her hand, her face pale with panic. Mr. Davenport, have you seen this? It's everywhere. What are we going to do? We have to issue a statement, a rebuttal. I looked up from the screen, my expression calm. I felt no anger, only a cold, clarifying certainty. My father was playing the only game he knew, a game of whispers and public opinion. And I was not going to play. No, I said, my voice firm. We don't issue a statement. We don't acknowledge it. We don't give it oxygen. I picked up a design schematic from my desk. It was for a new line of minimalist, elegant leather briefcases, a project I had personally designed years ago and that my father had rejected as too understated. My father can write his stories, I said, looking not at the slanderous article, but at the clean, promising lines of the new design. We're going to write our own, in leather and wood and steel. I handed her the schematic. Tell the design team I want a physical prototype of this on my desk by Friday. Tell Matteo to select the best possible hide we have in stock. We're moving up the launch for the autumn collection. Let the world talk. We have work to do. She stared at me, her panic slowly receding, replaced by a dawning understanding. I would not be distracted. I would not be baited. My father's War was one of noise, mine was one of substance. And it was a war one intended to win. The weeks following the board meeting were a siege. My father, true to Sterling's prediction, unleashed a relentless campaign of psychological warfare. It began with the gossip columns, but soon metastasized. Anonymous former executives gave interviews to financial news outlets, painting a picture of a company in chaos under an inexperienced, emotionally volatile new leader. Op-eds appeared, penned by academics from obscure business schools I suspected were on my father's payroll, questioning the wisdom of abandoning a time-tested brand-forward strategy. The attacks were like a constant, low-grade fever. They were designed to sap morale, spook investors, and poison the well of public opinion. I saw the effects in the slight slump of our stock price and in the nervous glances of my employees as they read the latest headlines on their phones. I received calls from a handful of our largest retail partners, their voices slick with concern, asking for assurances that the Davenport brand was stable. They weren't threatening to pull their orders, not yet, but the seed of doubt had been planted. My family was silent, at least directly, but I felt their influence behind every negative story. I pictured my father in his study, a king in exile, marshaling his forces, using his vast personal wealth and network of contacts as a weapon against his own legacy. Caleb and Isabel were likely the anonymous sources, feeding reporters carefully crafted lies over expensive lunches. They couldn't win in the boardroom, so they were trying to burn the kingdom down from the outside. My response was to build a fortress, not of stone, but of purpose. I established a daily war council meeting at 7 a.m. It consisted of me, Eleanor Chun, who attended via secure video link, my newly promoted heads of marketing and operations, and Arthur Sterling patching in for the first 10 minutes to give a legal threat assessment. The mood was tense but focused. Another article this morning. My head of marketing, Sarah, said during one of these meetings, a week into the siege. This one claims our artisans are on the verge of a walkout due to your draconian new management style. I looked at my head of operations, a steady man named David. David, what's the status on the new ventilation systems we approved for the finishing rooms? Installation is complete, he replied. And the first round of bonuses for the apprenticeship program goes out on Friday. Morale in the workshop has never been higher. Good, I said. Then that's our response. Sarah, I don't want you to draft a press release denying the rumor. I want you to do an internal feature story for the company newsletter, a profile on Matteo and the new CNC machine. Get a quote from him about what the new investments mean. We fight their lies not by acknowledging them, but by overwhelming them with our truth. We inoculate our own people first. Let them see the difference between the noise outside and the reality inside. This became our strategy. For every external attack, we launched an internal initiative. When an article questioned our financial stability, I released the preliminary findings of the audit to the entire company, showing exactly where money had been wasted on my family's vanity projects and exactly how those funds were being reallocated to product development and employee benefits. We were building a culture of radical transparency, turning my father's campaign of whispers into a weapon that only strengthened my position with the people who mattered, my employees. The turning point, the moment that shifted the energy from defense to offense, came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the takeover. It was the prototype meeting. We didn't meet in a sterile conference room. I had them bring the prototype to the workshop, the place of its birth. Matteo was there, his hands clean, but his leather apron still on. The lead designer, a young, brilliant woman named Anya, stood by nervously. I had my new executive team with me. On a clean workbench lay the fruit of our new direction, the LC1 briefcase, short for linear clutch, It was the physical embodiment of my entire philosophy. The leather was a deep, matte finish black, sourced from a small, sustainable tannery I admired. There was no gaudy hardware, no ostentatious logo. The only branding was a tiny, discreet Davenport crest blind embossed on the inside. Its beauty was in its form, its materials, the absolute perfection of its stitch line. It was silent, confident, and utterly flawless. I picked it up. It felt balanced in my hand. I tested the custom milled latch, which closed with a satisfying, near-silent click. I ran my thumb over the hand-burnished edges. I could feel the hours of expert work that had gone into it. It was a product of substance, not of marketing. This, I said, my voice quiet with a reverence that surprised even me, is the most beautiful thing this company has made in 20 years. Anya beamed. Matteo nodded, a deep pride in his eyes. This is our answer, I announced to my team. This is our press release. This is our rebuttal. We make this. We launch this, and we let it speak for us. Set the production schedule. I want the first run ready in 8 weeks. A wave of energy shot through the team. They finally had their marching orders, a tangible goal to rally around, a beautiful thing to protect them from the ugliness outside. But my father was not done. He had been a businessman for 40 years. He knew the company's pressure points, its dependencies. He knew that to create BLC1, we needed a consistent supply of that specific matte finish black leather. It came from a single, family-owned tannery in Tuscany that we had worked with for generations. A week later, David, my head of operations, walked into my office, his face pale. There's a problem, Alex, he said, a big one. It's our supplier in Italy, the Rossi Tannery. They've canceled our standing order. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Canceled it? On what grounds? They're claiming a catastrophic equipment failure and a contamination of their dye. VATs. They say they can't produce our specific black leather for at least a year. They're returning our deposit. David slid a printed email across my desk. The thing is, I have a friend at a rival fashion house. He says the Rosses just signed a massive, exclusive contract with an anonymous holding company based in the Cayman Islands. They were paid 3 times the market rate for their entire production capacity for the next 18 months. I didn't need to ask. The anonymous holding company was my father. He hadn't just tried to outbid us. He had bought our entire supply chain out from under us. It was a brilliant, vicious, and potentially fatal blow. It was sabotage of the highest order. Without that specific leather, the LC1, the symbol of our new direction, was dead before it was even born. The news ripped through the executive team. The hope and energy from the prototype meeting evaporated, replaced by a grim panic. We were cornered. We gathered in my office, the mood funereal. We can sue the Rossis for breach of contract, Sterling said over the speakerphone, but that will take years. He has you tied up. Sarah, my marketing head, was distraught. We've already started teasing the new aesthetic. If we can't deliver the product, we'll look like fools. It will prove every negative story Richard has planted is true. They were all looking at me, their new leader, for a solution to an impossible problem. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city. My father had played his trump card. He knew that for decades, Davenport and Sons' identity was tied to these exclusive, old-world European suppliers. He believed that by cutting us off from our past, he could kill our future. He was fighting the last war. And in that moment, I realized my path forward. He's right, I said, turning back to face my stunned team. He has cut us off from the Rossi Tannery. He's cornered us. I let that sink in for a moment, and he has just handed us our greatest opportunity. They stared at me, confused. My father's vision of luxury is 50 years old, I explained, a new energy. rising in my voice. It's based on a handful of old European families who have a monopoly on so-called prestige. He thinks that's our only source of strength. He's wrong. Our strength is our eye for quality, our commitment to craft, and our ability to innovate. He thinks we need the Rossies. The truth is, the Rosses needed us. I went to my desk and pulled out a thick binder. It was a personal research project I had been working on for years, in secret. It was filled with information on dozens of small, innovative, and sustainable material suppliers from all over the world, places my father had always dismissed as lacking heritage. I opened it to a page on a small, family-owned tannery outside of Kyoto, Japan. They specialized in a unique vegetable tanning process that produced a leather called Shinki Heikaku, known for its durability and a patina that grew more beautiful with age. My father thinks he's fighting over a single well, I said, tapping the page. I'm not interested in that well anymore. I'm going to build an aqueduct. I looked at my team, their panic now replaced by a dawning excitement. He is forcing us to modernize. He is forcing us to diversify. He is forcing us to be better, faster, and more creative than he ever was. He thinks he's laying a siege, but what he's actually doing is liberating us from the past. I closed the binder. My decision was made. Sarah, cancel my appointments for the rest of the week. David, get me everything you can on this Japanese tannery, and 2 others I have bookmarked in Spain and America. I want to know their capacity, their process, everything. And someone cancel my flight to Milan. I paused, looking at each of my trusted lieutenants in turn, and booked me a new one. To Kyoto. My father cut off a supplier. I'm going to build a global network. He wants to burn down the old world. Fine. A cold, hard smile touched my lips. We'll build a better one. My journey to Kyoto was not an escape. It was an advance. The city itself was a lesson in my new philosophy. In its ancient temples, I saw the profound beauty of tradition and meticulous craft. In its modern, bustling streets, I saw the power of sleek, efficient design. It was a city that understood that the past was not a thing to be worshipped from a distance, but a foundation upon which to build a better future. The tannery was located an hour outside the city, nestled in a valley of impossible green. It was nothing like the grand, almost feudal estate of the Rossi family in Tuscany. This place, the House of Tanaka, was a collection of low, dark wood buildings that blended seamlessly into the landscape. It was run by a man named Mr. Kenji Tanaka, a third-generation master tanner whose quiet dignity reminded me instantly of Mateo, that he did not greet me in an office. He met me on the workshop floor, where the air smelled of bark, oil, and clean water. He showed me his process, the months-long, patient art of vegetable tanning that produced a leather so dense and full of character it felt alive in my hands. He called it Shinki Heikaku. It was stronger, more supple, and had a deeper, more complex character than the Italian leather we had been using. It was, in every conceivable way, better. We didn't just talk business. We talked about craft, about honor, about the responsibility of creating something that lasts. He had heard of Davenport and Sons, but he was wary of the European luxury houses. He saw them as fickle, obsessed with logos and fleeting trends. They do not respect the material, he told me over cups of green tea. They see leather as a canvas for their brand. I see the brand as a servant to the leather. That is the company I am trying to build, I told him. And he believed me. I did not leave with a simple supply contract. I left with a partnership. We agreed to a collaboration, a new line of leather tanned exclusively for us, using a custom blend of tannins he had developed. I didn't just find a new supplier. I found a new soul for my product. My father's act of sabotage had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He had tried to cut my roots, and in doing so had forced me to grow a stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful tree. The next 3 months were the most intense and fulfilling of my life. The flight back from Japan was the beginning of a global tour. I visited a small, family-owned steel workshop in Germany that forged the most incredible hardware I had ever seen. I found an American startup that had developed a revolutionary, sustainable canvas material. I was not just diversifying the supply chain, I was curating a collection of the world's best artisans. I was building my new world. Back at the company, the energy was electric. The launch of the new collection, now headlined by the LC1 briefcase made with Tanaka's Shinki Haikaku leather, became a singular focus. The artisans, energized by the new materials and my unwavering support, did the best work of their careers. The marketing team, led by Sarah, crafted a launch campaign that was quiet, confident, and focused entirely on the story of the craft. There were no celebrities, no lavish parties. The campaign was a series of short, beautifully shot documentaries about Mr. Tanaka, the German steel forger, and our own Matteo Dodd. The forensic audit results came in. As I expected, they were damning. Years of frivolous spending, questionable expense reports from Caleb, and large, unexplained consulting fees paid out from my father's discretionary fund. Sterling handled it with quiet, surgical precision. There were no public accusations, but the message was delivered to my father through legal channels. The evidence had been compiled, and any further attacks on the company would result in that evidence being handed to the SEC and IRS. The campaign of noise against us stopped abruptly. The silence from my father's camp was now absolute. We launched the new collection on a Tuesday in October. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Critics and fashion journalists who had been fed a diet of my father's slander were now faced with an undeniable product. They praised the bold new direction, the commitment to authentic craftsmanship, and the breathtaking quality of the materials. The LC1 sold out its initial run in 72 hours. Our stock price, which had wavered, began a steady, inexorable climb. We had answered the noise with substance, and substance had won. 2 weeks after the launch, I received an email. It was from my father's personal account. The message was 5 words long. I would like to meet. We met in the bar of a quiet old hotel in the city center. A neutral ground. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a dark leather booth, a glass of untouched whiskey before him. He looked smaller. The towering, tyrannical figure from the boardroom was gone, replaced by an old, tired man in an expensive suit. The fury in his eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind only the gray ash of defeat. "Alexander," he said, his voice raspy. He did not invite me to sit. I sat anyway. We were silent for a long time. The only sounds were the clink of glasses and the low murmur of other conversations. "Why?" he finally asked, his gaze fixed on his glass. "I never understood. I would have given you anything. A higher salary, a promotion, vice chairman. All you had to do was ask." I looked at this man who was my father, and I felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were observing a historical figure from behind glass. "You think this was about a title? About money?" I said, my voice even. "You still don't understand. You never did. You saw the company as your possession, a bank account, a stage for you and your children to perform on. You could have given me any title you wanted. It wouldn't have mattered. Grandfather," I continued, "gave me a legacy. He gave me a company built on a principle that the thing you make matters more than the name you put on it. You were letting it rot from the inside out. You were selling off its soul for a quick headline and a fancy party." I leaned forward, the laughter, that day in the boardroom. It wasn't the reason I did what I did. It was just the final proof. The proof that you, Caleb, and Isabel had nothing but contempt for the work, for the company, and for me. It proved you were unfit to be its guardians. He finally looked at me, his eyes searching my face for the son he thought he knew. He found a stranger. So it was revenge, he whispered. No, I said, and the truth of it felt absolute. It was a restoration. He sank back into the booth, the last bit of fight going out of him. He had been defeated by a motive he couldn't comprehend, duty. He had lost his kingdom not to a greedier king, but to a more faithful servant. We left without another word being spoken. The war was over. 6 months passed. The company thrived in a way it hadn't in decades. We were profitable, respected, and growing. We were a brand known once again for quality, not just for a name. One afternoon, Arthur Sterling patched a call through to my office. It was my father. His voice was formal, devoid of all emotion. Alexander, he said, I am calling to inform you that me, Caleb, and Isabel have agreed to sell our remaining minority shares. We are divesting completely from the company. It was the final, unconditional surrender. I will have the company's investment officer prepare the necessary paperwork to acquire the shares. I said, my own voice just as formal. Good, he said. And then, after a pause, a single final word. Goodbye. He hung up. I placed my own phone down. I felt no surge of triumph, no joy, only a quiet, profound sense of peace. The last ghost of the old regime was gone. I stood and walked to the window. My office, once a symbol of my loneliness, was now just a room. The heart of the company was not there. It was in the workshops, in the design studios, in the hands of the hundreds of people who now worked with a shared purpose. I had not just taken over a company. I had built a new family, one forged in mutual respect and a common goal. On my desk lay the first sketches for the next collection. The future. I picked them up, the weight of the paper in my hand, feeling like a promise. The king was secure on his throne. But his gaze was not on his crown. It was on the work yet to be done.